The Theology of Arithmetic on the mystical, mathematical, and cosmological symbolism of the first 10 numbers attributed to Iamblichus, translated from the Greek by Robin Waterfield. Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. In this series of videos, we are exploring ancient number theology, specifically as documented in this treatise attributed to Iamblichus, where ancient philosophers explored the mystical, mathematical, and cosmological significance of the first 10 numbers, and they came to demonstrate their symbolic and divine qualities. Like I mentioned in the first video of this series, we are dealing with both ancient philosophy and explanations of mathematical concepts as it relates to numbers. So it gets a little bit archaic or maybe a little bit in the weeds, but still, it is quite fascinating. And I'm not saying that the Greeks were the first to introduce numbers. According to what I've read, there was a find in the 1950s known as the ISHANGO bone, and this find opened the conversation about the first known method of finding primes, which were originally credited to the Greeks. Now, this shifts the attention to the African people as being the first to conceive prime numbers. The ISHANGO bone of Africa is said to date back to around 20,000 BC, and it features notches believed to represent early counting. Until then, it was held that Sumeria back in 4000 BC had records of tallying, as they were one of the first civilizations to feature cities that were centers of trade. What can be credited to the Greeks, in my opinion, is the use of numbers to explain the structure and harmony of the universe by associating specific attributes and cosmic principles with each number. They developed numerical explanations for the creation of the cosmos. You'll see that throughout this work. They also associated odd numbers with limited finite qualities and even numbers with unlimited infinite qualities. As someone that uses numbers on a daily basis, no, I'm not an accountant. I use it in my consultations as a divination tool, and I'm learning something every day. I find these additional explanations opening up areas in my mind that allows me to see numbers beyond its tallying function and appreciate the intangible essence and unique fluidity that each brings. As the ancient Greeks explained it, one can almost sense the cosmic order and the pregnant infinity of the basic numbers 1 through 10. And to my understanding, bringing the numbers to life is the Greeks' greatest contribution to math, as they sought their properties, patterns, structure, measurements, harmonies, and more in their search for understanding and union with the divine. This next section will showcase the treatise on the Triad through the Pentad. I am now finding it difficult to choose a favorite number, as each one has not only meaning, but it's now hard not to see number in everything, and each number has essence. I don't know if I'm making any sense here, and if you do understand, please leave me a comment. I do want to say, you don't have to be a mathematical guru to appreciate the esoteric concept of what Iamblichus is proposing here. He explains the different attributes of the numbers and their relationship to each other, as well as their association with aspects in nature. I am sure that those who have a select affinity for math may appreciate the lingo and feel right at home. I will conclude my intro right here. I do hope you enjoy this. If anything, we can pretend we are in ancient Greece. We're heading to the Pantheon, or maybe to the theater of Bacchus, right here in Athens. Iamblichus is not too far ahead. We're all walking, taking a stroll, and he's talking numbers, of course. You and I, well, we're enjoying the scenery. I now turn the page. On the Triad. The Triad has a special beauty and fairness beyond all numbers, primarily because it is the very first to make actual the potentialities of the monad: oddness, perfection, proportionality, unification, limit. For 3 is the first number to be actually odd, since in conformity with its descriptions it is more than equal and has something more than the equal in another part. and it is special in respect of being successive to the two sources and a system of them both. At any rate, it is perfect in a more particular way than the other numbers to which consecutive numbers from the monad to the tetrad are found to be equal. I mean, that is, the monad, triad, hexad, and decad. The monad, as the basic number of this series, is equal to the monad. The triad is equal to monad and dyad. The hexad is equal to monad, dyad, and triad. The decad is equal to monad, dyad, triad, and tetrad. So the triad seems to have something extra in being successive to those which it is also equal. Moreover, they called it mean and proportion, not so much because it is the very first of the numbers to have a middle term, which in particular maintains in a relation of equality to the extremes, but because in the manner of equality among these of the same genus, where there is a mean between greater and less inequality of species, it too is seen as midway between more and less and has a symmetrical nature. The number which comes before it, too, is more than the one before it, and this being double is the root of the basic relation of being more than, and the number which comes after it, 4, is less than the numbers which precede it. And this, being sesquialter, is the very first to have the specific identity of the basic relation of being less than. But the triad between both of these is equal to what precedes it, so it gains the specific identity of a mean between the others. Hence, on account of it, there are 3 so-called true means: arithmetic, geometric, and harmonic, and 3 which are subcontrary to these, and 3 terms in the case of each mean, and 3 intervals, that is, in the case of each term. The differences between the small term and the mean and the large term, and the small and the large terms. And an equal number of ratios, according to what was said in ordering the antecedents, and moreover, 3 reversals appear on examination of great to small, great to mean, and mean to small. Footnote: a ratio is, say, 2 to 4, whereas the intervals mentioned just before are the differences between any 2 terms in a proportion. The interval in the ratio 2 to 4 is 2. The reversals are simply expressing the proportions the other way around, so that, for instance, the geometric proportion 1, 2, 4 becomes 4, 2, 1, and the ratio 2 to 4 becomes 4 to 2. End of footnote. The monad is like a seed in containing in itself the unformed and also unarticulated principle of every number. The dyad is a small advance towards number, but it is not number outright because it is like a source, but the triad causes the potential of the monad to advance into actuality and extension. This belongs to the monad either to the dyad, and each and every to the triad. Hence we use the triad also for the manifestation of plurality, and say thrice 10,000, when we mean many times many, and thrice blessed. Hence, too, we traditionally invoke the dead 3 times. Moreover, anything in nature which has process has 3 boundaries: beginning, peak, and end, that is, its limits and its middle, and 2 intervals, that is, increase and decrease, with the consequence that the nature of the dyad and either manifests in the triad by means of its limits. The triad is called prudence and wisdom, that is, when people act correctly as regards the present, look ahead to the future, and gain experience from what has already happened in the past. So wisdom surveys the 3 parts of time, and consequently knowledge falls under the triad. They call the triad piety. Hence, the name triad is derived from terror, that is, fear and caution. From Anatolius, the triad, the first odd number, is called perfect by some because it is the first number to signify the totality, beginning, middle, and end. When people exalt extraordinary events, they derive words from the triad and talk of thrice blessed, thrice fortunate. prayers and libations are performed 3 times. Triangles both reflect and are the first substantiation of being plane. And there are 3 kinds of triangle: equilateral, isosceles, and scalene. Moreover, there are 3 rectilinear angles: acute, obtuse, and right. And there are 3 parts of time. Among the virtues, they likened it to moderation, for it is commensurability between excess and deficiency. Moreover, the triad makes 6 by the addition of the monad, dyad, and itself, and 6 is the first perfect number. From Nicomache's Theology: the triad is the source in actuality of number, which is by definition a system of monads. For the dyad is in a sense a monad on account of being like source, but the triad is the first to be a system of monad and dyad, but it is also the very first which admits of end, middle, and beginning, which are the causes of all completion and perfection being attained. The triad is the form of the completion of all things, and is truly number, and gives all things equality and a certain lack of excess and deficiency, having defined and formed matter with the potential for all qualities. At any rate, 3 is particular and special beyond all other numbers in respect of being equal to the numbers which precede it. Those who are requesting that their prayers be answered by God pour libations 3 times and perform sacrifices 3 times, and we say thrice fortunate and thrice happy and thrice blessed, and qualify all the opposites to these as thrice, in the case of those to whom each of these features is present in a perfect form, so to speak. They say that it is called triad by comparison with someone being unyielding, that is, not to be worn down. It gets this name because it is impossible to divide it into 2 equal parts. The triad is the first plurality, for we talk of singular and dual, but then not triple, but plural properly. Footnote: nouns and adjectives in Greek had 3 numbers: singular, dual, and plural. End of footnote. The triad is pervasive in the nature of number, for there are 3 types of odd number: prime and incomposite, secondary and composite, and mixed, which is secondary in itself but otherwise prime. And again, there are over-perfect, imperfect, and perfect numbers, and in short, of relative quantity, some is greater, some less, and some equal. The triad is very well suited to geometry, for the basic element in plane figures is the triangle, and there are 3 kinds of triangle: acute angled, obtuse angled, and scalene. There are 3 configurations of the moon: waxing, full moon, and waning. There are 3 types of irregular motion of the planets: direct motion, retrogression, and between these, the stationary mode. There are 3 circles which define the zodiacal plane: that of summer, that of winter, and the one midway between these, which is called the ecliptic. There are 3 kinds of living creature: land, winged, and water. There are 3 fates in theology, because the whole life of both divine and mortal beings is governed by emission and receiving, and thirdly, requital, with the heavenly beings fertilizing in some way, the earth beings receiving, as it were, and requitals being paid by means of those in the middle, as if they were a generation between male and female. One could relate to all this the words of Homer, quote, "All was divided into 3," end quote. Given that we also find that the virtues are means between 2 vicious states which are opposed both to each other and to virtue. And there is no disagreement with the notion that the virtues fall under the monad and are something definite and noble and are wisdom, for the mean is one, while the vices fall under the dyad and are indefinite, unnoble, and senseless. They call it friendship and peace, and further harmony and the unanimity, for those are all cohesive and unifactory of opposites and dissimilars. Hence they all call it marriage, and there are also 3 ages in life. End of section. On the Tetrad. Everything in the universe turns out to be completed in the natural progression up to the Tetrad, in general and in particular, as does everything numerical. In short, everything, whatever its nature. The fact that the decad, which is gnomon and joiner, is consummated by the tetrad along with the numbers which precede it, is special and particularly important for the harmony which completion brings. Footnote. Here, gnomon is used primarily in its original sense as a carpenter's tool. As defined by Heron, however, a mathematical gnomon is that which, when added to any figure or number, makes the result similar to the original to which it was added, and the decad does this, such as in the example of 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. End of footnote. So is the fact that it provides the limit of corporeality and three-dimensionality. For the pyramid, which is the minimal solid and the one which first appears, is obviously contained by tetrad, either of angles or of faces, just as what is perceptible as a result of matter and form, which is a complete result in 3 dimensions, exists in 4 terms. Moreover, it is better and less liable to error to apprehend the truth in things and to gain secure scientific knowledge by means of the quadrivium of mathematical sciences. For instance, all things in general are subject to quantity, then they are juxtaposed and heaped together as discrete things, and are subject to size when they are combined and continuous, and since, in terms of quantity, things are conceived as either absolute or relative, and in terms of size, as either at rest or in motion. Accordingly, the 4 mathematical systems or sciences will make their respective apprehensions in a manner appropriate to each thing. Arithmetic apprehends quantity in general, but especially absolute quantity. Music apprehends quantity when it is relative, and geometry apprehends size in general, but especially static size. Astronomy apprehends size when it is in motion and undergoing orderly change. If number is the form of things, and the terms up to the tetrad are the roots and elements, as it were, of number, then these terms would contain the aforementioned properties and the manifestations of the 4 mathematical sciences: the monad of arithmetic, the dyad of music, the triad of geometry, and the tetrad of astronomy, just as in the text entitled On the Gods. Pythagoras distinguishes them as follows: 4 are the foundations of wisdom, arithmetic, music, geometry, astronomy, ordered 1, 2, 3, 4. And Clinias of Tarentum says, these things when at rest gave rise to arithmetic and geometry, and when moving to harmony and astronomy. In the first place, the association of arithmetic with the monad is reasonable, for when arithmetic is abolished, so are the other sciences, and they are generated when it is generated, but not vice versa, with the result that is more primal than them and is their mother, just as the monad evidently is as regards the numbers which follow it. But also every specific identity and property and attribute of number is found first of all in the monad, as in a seed. The monad is, in a sense, quantity regarded as absolute and as the sole agent of limit and true definition. For if anything is conjoined with anything else, it cannot be alone, but must fall under the dyad, for the dyad contains the primary conception of difference. And music obviously pertains to difference in some way, since it is a relation and a harmonious fitting together of things which altogether dissimilar and involved in difference. And geometry falls under the triad, not only because it is concerned with 3-dimensionality and its parts and kinds, but also because it was characteristic of this teacher always to call surfaces which they used to term colors the limiters of geometry, on the grounds that geometry concerns itself primarily with planes. But the most elementary plane is contained by a triad, either of angles or lines, and when depth is added, from this is a base to a single point, when in turn the most elementary of solids, the pyramid, is formed, which even though in itself it is encompassed by at least 4 angles or surfaces, is fitted together by virtue of 3 equal dimensions. And these dimensions form the limits of anything subsisting in nature as a solid. And astronomy, the science of the heavenly spheres, falls under the Tetrad, because of all solids, the most perfect and the one which particularly embraces the rest by nature, and is outstanding in thousands of other respects, is the sphere, which is a body consisting of 4 things: center, diameter, circumference, and area, i.e. surface. Because the Tetrad is like this, people used to swear by Pythagoras on account of it, obviously because they were astounded at his discovery and addressed him with devotion for it. So Empedocles says somewhere, quote, "No, by him who handed down to our generation the Tetractys, the fount which holds the roots of ever-flowing nature," end quote. For they used ever-flowing nature as a metaphor for the Decad, since it is, as it were, the eternal and everlasting nature of all things and kinds of thing, and in accordance with it, the things of the universe are completed and have a harmonious and most beautiful limit. And its roots are the numbers up to the Tetrad, 1, 2, 3, 4. As we mentioned before in the footnote, this is 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. For these are the limits and, as it were, the sources of the properties of number: the monad of sameness, which is regarded as absolute; the dyad of difference and what is already relative; the triad of particularity and of actual oddness; the tetrad of actual evenness. For the dyad is often viewed by us as being odd-like on account of being like a source, since it is not yet receptive of the pure properties of evenness and is not capable of being subdivided. The tetrad is the first to encompass minimal and most seminal embodiment, since the most elementary body and the one with the smallest particles is fire, and this is the body whose shape as a solid is a pyramid, hence the name, which alone is enclosed by 4 bases and 4 angles. Footnote: Pyramis, pyramid, is linked with pur, P-U-R, fire. End of footnote. And this, we can be sure, is why there are 4 sources of the universe, whether, as we said before, it is seen as an eternal continuum or as a created composition: the by which, the from which, the by means of which, and the with what end, that is, God, matter, form, result. And there are evidently also 4 elements: fire, air, water, and earth, and their powers: heat, cold, wetness, and dryness, which are disposed in things according to the nature of the tetrad. The heavenly realm has also been arranged in the same way, for it has been assigned 4 centers: the one over the zenith, the one at the ascendant, the one at right angles under the earth, and the one at the descendant, which 4 turn out to constitute the zodiac between them. And moreover, it has been assigned 4 limits: north, south, east, and west, and taking account of its sphericity, it has been assigned center, axis, circumference, and area. Moreover, there are also this many so-called 90-degree divisions of the zodiac, the points at which by means of the ecliptic there is contact with the 4 zodiacal signs in which the summer and winter solstices and the 2 equinoxes occur, which form a cross by being diametrically opposed. And heaven has 4 characteristic movements, which are interrelated and mutually dependent, and are special to it alone: forward through the midheaven in each latitude, backward through the nadir, upward through something rising above the horizon, and downward through something setting. Footnote: there is an obvious lacuna in the text. I have filled it in with reasonable guess. What the author seems to be referring to is nothing more than that if I stand facing east, say, then the apparent motion of any heavenly body is upward as it rises, forward as it passes above me, downward as it sets, and backward as it goes away from me under the earth. End of footnote. There are 4 traditional seasons of the year: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And there are 4 measures, so to speak, of general change, of which the largest is the unbroken one called eternity. The next, time, is incomprehensible in itself by the mind. The next in order of subordination is critical time, which is in way accessible to apprehension by our senses, and the one which has the shortest duration and extension is passing time. And from another point of view, there is year, month, night, and day. Analogously, as regards the contemplation of the universe, there are angels, daemons, animals, and plants which complete the universe. They even distinguish 4 kinds of planetary movements: progression, retrogression, and 2 modes of being stationary, primary and secondary. There are 4 distinct senses in living creatures, for touch is a common background to the other 4, which is why it alone does not have a location on a regular organ. There are 4 kinds of plants: trees, shrubs, vegetables, and herbs. There are 4 kinds of virtues: first, wisdom in the soul and corresponding to it, keen sensibility of the body and good fortune in external matters. Second, moderation in the soul and health in the body and good repute in external matters. Third, on the same arrangement, courage, strength, and power. And fourth, justice, beauty, and friendship. Moreover, just as there are 4 seasons such as summer, so there are 4 seasons for man: childhood, youth, adulthood, and old age. The most elementary numerical properties are 4: sameness in the monad, difference in the dyad, color in the triad, and solidity in the tetrad. Man is divided into 4: head, trunk, legs, and arms. And there are 4 sources of a rational creature, as Philolaus also says On Nature: brain, heart, navel, and genitals. Head for thought, heart for soul and for feeling, navel for the embryo to take root and to grow, genitals for the emission of seed and for birth. The brain provides the source for man, the heart for animals, the navel for plants, the genitals for them all, for they all both sprout and grow from seed. Even if plurality is first seen in the triad, nevertheless accretion of discrete things cannot be conceived of without the tetrad. Moreover, among continuous things too, the pyramid falls under the tetrad and naturally acquires a shape which is hard to dissolve, and which belongs to a body which is hard to dissolve. And accretion is in a sense the evolution of plurality, and is stronger than anything which falls under the triad. And just like Solon's apothegm about seeing the end of a long life, it is possible to understand from Homer that those who are still alive are only thrice blessed in a point of happiness, since there is still the uncertainty of change and alteration, while those who are dead have happiness securely and are out of the reach of change in a more complete manner, i.e., fourfold. For he says of someone still alive, thrice blessed son of Atreus, but of those who have died an excellent death, thrice and 4 times blessed are the Greeks who perished then. Footnote. The first quote is perhaps from a variant of Iliad, Book 3, line 182. The second line is Odyssey, Book 5, line 306. End of footnote. The tetrad is the foundation of natural plurality and accretion, since the 4 kinds of perfection correspond and are equivalent to the 4 perfect numbers which subsist within the decad, and are progressively equal to the numbers which run in unbroken sequence from the monad to the tetrad. For in the first place, although the monad is uncompounded, still it has a kind of perfection in counting everything potentially and in lacking nothing. And besides, it gives rise to all the other numbers and gives them their specific identities, regardless of what alterations differentiations has caused. And if any kind of thing is something perfect when it is equal to its parts, then even though the monad has no parts, nevertheless, as a whole, it is equal to itself, so it would be perfect. In the second place, the triad is special in being both equal to and successive to the monad and the dyad, while it is perfect in another way and in itself, because it in particular contains beginning, middle, and end. In the third place, as regards 1, 2, 3, although it is no longer successive, the hexad is equal to them and perfect in the sense that it is the first number to be equal to its own parts, a half, a third, and a sixth. In the fourth place, as regards 1, 2, 3, 4, the decad, although even less successive, has acquired perfection in a different way from those other ways. For it is a measure and a complete boundary of every number, and there is no longer any natural number after it, but all subsequent numbers are produced by participation in the decad, when the cycle is started a second time, and then again and again on to infinity. So here is a tetractys, and this is the difference between the perfect numbers within the decad. No doubt it is for the following reason that, while the most important and, as it were, more perfect fevers are the tertane and quartan, which are also the most easy to discern, nevertheless the quatrain is the more important and the more secure, and hence harder to eliminate, because of the stability of the number 4, a stability which binds everything in a pyramidal manner to secure bases. And this is why they say that Heracles, who was so steadfast, was born thanks to a tetrad. Squares are, so to speak, not easy to shake from their disdain, just like Hermes, who was fashioned in this way. Since 4 is cubic and lies midway between the cubic places of the monad and the hebdomad, it is not surprising to find doctors like Hippocrates, for the hebdomad is particularly critical in illness, manifestly saying that in the real world in general, the tetrad has broad links which the hebdomad, and besides, the joining of the tetrad with the hebdomad makes the decad capable of producing a fourth cubic place in the series. They used to call the tetrad the nature of Iamblichus, showing the variety of what it is akin to. Footnote: Iamblichus means the shifter. End of footnote. It is the prerequisite of the general orderliness of the universe, so they everywhere called it a custodian of nature. Poetry says that Iamblichus provides the winds that give motion, and he is also called the Pentad, from the speed of the heavenly bodies which bring him the completion, and because of his incessant running. Footnote: Hippotades means son of the horseman. End of footnote. For Aeolus is the year on account of the variety of things that grow year by year. And again they call the tetrad Heracles with regard to the same notion of the year as giving rise to duration, since eternity, time, critical time, and passing time are 4, as moreover are year, month, night, and day, and morning, midday, evening, and night. They think that the tetrad is called Tetrad, the enduring one, by interchange of L with R, because its square root endures the first separation from the monad, and it causes all the dimensions to subsist, or the 3 dimensions beyond which there are none. The Pythagorean honored it as the begetter of the decad. Anatolius reports that it is called justice, since the square, i.e. the area, which is based on it is equal to the perimeter, for the perimeter of squares before it is greater than the area of those squares, and the perimeter of squares after it is less than the area, but in its case the perimeter is equal. The tetrad is the first to display the nature of solidity. The sequence is point, line, plane, solid, i.e. body. 4 is the first number which is even times even. 4 is the first number which contains the sequitertian ratio, which belongs to the primary concord, the fourth. In its case, everything is equal: area, angles, sides. There are 4 cardinal points, and there are 4 distinguishing points: ascendant, descendant, mid-heaven, and nadir. The primary winds are 4. Some say that all things are organized by 4 aspects: substance, shape, form, and principle. The tetrad comprehends the principle of soul as well as that of corporeality, for they say that a living creature is ensouled in the same way that the whole universe is arranged, according to harmony. Perfect harmony seems to subsist in 3 concords: the fourth, which lies in the sequitertian ratio, the fifth in the sequialter, and the octave in double. Once there are the first 4 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, then there's also the category of soul. which these numbers encompass in accordance with musical principles. For 4 is double 2 and 2 is double 1, and here is the octaval concord. 3 is 1.5 times 2, es sesqualter, and here is the fifth. And 4 is sesquitertian to 3, and here is the fourth. If the universe is composed out of soul and body in the number 4, then it is also true that all concords are perfected by it. End of section. On the Pentad. From Anatolius. The Pentad is the first number to encompass the specific identity of all number, since it encompasses 2, the first even number, and 3, the first odd number. Hence it is called marriage, since it is formed of male and female. It is the midpoint of the decad. When it is squared, it always encompasses itself, for 5 times 5 equals 25. And when it is multiplied again, it both encompasses the square as a whole and terminates at itself, for 5 times 25 equals 125. There are 5 solid figures with equal sides and equal angles. The tetrahedron, pyramid, octahedron, icosahedron, cube, and dodecahedron. And Plato says that the first is the figure of fire, the second of air, the third of water, the fourth of earth, and the fifth of the universe. Moreover, there are 5 planets, not counting the sun and moon. The square on base 5 is the first to be equal to 2 squares, the one on base 3, and the one on base 4. A tetrachord is said to consist of the first even and the first odd number. Geometric concord is thought to fall under 5. Moreover, whatever you use to add up to 10, 5 will be found to be the arithmetic mean. Example, 9 plus 1, 8 plus 2, 7 plus 3, 6 plus 4. Each sum adds up to 10, and 5 is found to be the arithmetic mean, as the diagram shows. The pentad is the first to exhibit the best and most natural mediacy, when, in conjunction with the dyad, it is taken in disjunct proportion to both the limits of natural number, to the monad as source and the decad as end. For as 1 is to 2, so 5 is to 10, and again as 10 is to 5, so 2 is to 1, and alternately as 10 is to 2, 5 is to 1, and as 2 is to 10, 1 is to 5. And the product of the limits is equal to the product of the means, as is the way with geometrical proportion, for 2 times 5 equals 1 times 10. Reciprocally, we are able to see first in the pentad, compared with the greater limit, the principle of half, just as we see this principle first in the dyad, compared with the smaller limit, for 2 is double 1 and 5 is half 10. Hence the pentad is particularly comprehensive of the natural phenomena of the universe. It is a frequent assertion of ours that the whole universe is manifestly completed and enclosed by the decad, and seeded by the monad, and it gains movement thanks to the dyad and life thanks to the pentad, which is particularly and most appropriately and only a division of the decad, since the pentad necessarily entails equivalence, while the dyad entails ambivalence. So there are 5 general elements of the universe: earth, water, air, fire, and aether, and their figures are 5: tetrahedron, hexahedron, octahedron, dodecahedron, and icosahedron. Moreover, the sum of the bases of these figures is 10 times the principle of the pentad. There are 5 parallel circles in the heavens: the celestial equator, the summer and winter tropics on either side of the equator, which are equal to each other but secondary items in terms of size, and the circles on either side of the tropics, which define the northern and southern elevations, the Arctic and Antarctic circles, which are smallest in size, but they too are equal to each other. And corresponding to the position of these, there are thought to be 5 zones on Earth too: the hot zone corresponding to the equator, 2 well-blended zones corresponding to the 2 tropics, and an equal number of zones which are uninhabited thanks to the cold of the poles at either end of the earth. There are only 5 planets, apart from the sun and moon, and there are this many phases of the moon, generally speaking, 2 when it is halved, 2 when it is gibbous, and 1 when it is full. Some people are more precise, and instead of the 2 halved phases, put 2 crescent phases in the number of phases. For the moon is not really halved at the time when it is thought to be. It only appears to be halved, but it is demonstrable geometrically that it is altogether necessary for the illuminated part to be more than it appears to be, and for the dark part to be less, since the sphere of the moon is smaller than that of the sun, and more than half of such a sphere is always lit up, so that the shadow cast ends up conical, and the shape which is produced in the opposite direction to the verticality of the lines of the cone is like a kaleithos, and the circular line which defines the illuminated part and the dark part circumscribes a base which is common to both shapes. Footnote: a kaleithos is a basket with a narrower base than top. The diagram is as follows. There are also 5 contacts among the straight lines which accomplish the cosmic centers, for it is obvious that these are 2 diameters, which are the largest lines, intersecting each other at right angles. So they touch themselves and the heavenly sphere at 5 points, themselves at the cosmic center, the sphere at those mentioned centers. There are this many sense organs in more highly developed creatures because of kinship and similarity of arrangement and of descending order to the elements. This is why nature separated each of the extremities of our bodily part, the extremities of our feet and hands, in a 5-fold way, into fingers and toes, and there are 5 types of internal organ: kidneys, lung, liver, spleen, and heart. And at a general survey, there are 5 types of parts which are visible on the surface of the body: head, arms, trunk, genitals, and legs. And there are 5 genera of creatures: those that live in fire, those that live in the air, those that live on earth, those that live in water, and amphibious creatures. They called the Pentad lack of strife, not only because aether, the 5th element, which is set apart on its own, remains unchanging, while there is strife and change among the things under it, from the moon to the earth, but also because the primary 2 different and dissimilar kinds of number, even and odd, are, as it were, reconciled and knitted together by the Pentad, which is a composite whole consisting of their conjunction. Just as aether also remains reconciled to itself in shape and being, and so on, and is found to provide such a property for everything else which displays all the kinds of opposition the 2 sources involve. Hence, Megillus too praises the Pentad on his On Numbers, and says, quote, "The Pentad is alteration, light, lack of strife, alteration because it changes 3-dimensionality into the sameness of the sphere by moving cyclically and engendering light. Hence it is light too, and it is lack of strife because it combines everything which was formerly discordant and brings together and reconciles the 2 types of number." End quote. The Pentad is highly expressive of justice, and justice comprehends all the other virtues, for justice would be what gives what is appropriate to each thing and governs equality in the soul, and equality is involved only in the rational part of the soul, while inequality has to do with the irrational part, unless it yields and listens to reason. But what is equal is homogeneous, for there's only 1 type of equality, but what is unequal is highly heterogeneous, for there are many types of inequality, and has 2 primary types, greater and lesser. So also where the soul is concerned, there will be an equal part and unequal part, and the equal part will be divine and rational, while the unequal part will be mortal and irrational. And the greater aspect of the unequal part is the passionate soul, for it is boiling over and, as it were, desire to shed excess, while the lesser aspect is the appetitive soul, for it is defective because of its seeking for what is missing. But everything, when it is controlled by the rational part of the soul and partakes of equality on account of the rational part, gains virtue. The passionate part acquires courage, the appetitive part, moderation. So if there is any number which is equal times equal, then it would be form and be receptive of justice. Every square number is equals times equal, but not every square number admits of a mean, but obviously only any one which is odd, for as a general principle, no mean of an even number can be found. And of the odd numbers, the most appropriate and fitting would be the basic number of the series, since the numbers which follow it in the series admit its principles. Scientific and philosophic demonstrations always make use of the very smallest basic numbers as both simple and trustworthy, and observe in them as paradigms the properties which they have in common with numbers of the same kind. For example, they prefer to observe in the dyad set against the monad the properties of the naturally infinite doubles, and in the triad set against the dyad the properties of the sesquialters. Thus the concept and principle of justice, which is revealed in a number which is equal times equal, a square number, would not be correctly revealed in an even number, since that cannot have a mean, but clearly in an odd number, and among odd numbers, in the most basic of the series, the one which is, as it were, the seed of the rest, because this is the one which is accessible to knowledge. In other words, it will be revealed first in the 9, for this, being 3 times 3, is the basic number of the series, which its root is the first odd number, 3, which is the first side number with a mean, and it is the first square number to have a mean. So we must try to adapt our account of justice to this, following the Pythagorean definition of justice, which is, quote, the power of repayment of what is equal and appropriate, being encompassed by the mean of a square odd number. In the first place, we must set out in a row the sequence of numbers from the monad up to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then we must add up the amount of all of them together, and since the row contains 9 terms, we must look for the 9th part of the total, to see if it is already naturally present among the numbers in the row, and we will find that the property of being the 9th belongs only to the mean itself. So, you see, the pentad is another thing which has neither excess nor defectiveness in it, and it will turn out to provide this property for the rest of the numbers, so that it is a kind of justice on the analogy of weighing instrument. For if we suppose that the row of numbers is some such weighing instrument, and the mean number 5 is the whole of the balance, then all the parts towards the anid, starting with the hexad, will sink down because of their quantity, and those towards the monad, starting with the tetrad, will rise up because of their fewness, and the ones which have the advantage will altogether be triple the total of the ones over which they have the advantage, but 5 itself, as the hole in the beam, partakes of neither, but it alone has equality and sameness. The parts adjacent to it gradually decrease in advantage or disadvantage the closer they get to it, just like the parts which move away little by little from the scales on the beam towards the balance. The anid and the monad are at the furthest distance, whence the anid has the greatest advantage, the monad the greatest disadvantage, each by a full tetrad. A little further in form, these are the ogdoad and dyad, whence the ogdoad has a little less excess, the dyad a little less defectiveness. In each case, the excess and the defectiveness is a triad. Then, next to these are the hebdomad and the triad, whence the triad is defective and the hebdomad excessive by the next amount. They are a dyad away from the center. Further in from these and next to the pentad, as it were to the balance, and the tetrad and the hexad, which has the least excess, for no smaller number than this can be thought of. When the beam is suspended, the parts with excess make excessive both the angle at the scales and their angles at the balance, while the parts with defectiveness make the angle defective in both cases, and the obtuse angle is the excessive one, since a right angle has the principle of maximum equality. Since in a case of injustice, those who are wronged and those who do wrong are equivalent, just as in a case of inequality, the greater and the lesser parts are equivalent. But nevertheless, those who do wrong are more unjust than those who suffer wrong, for the one group requires punishment, the other compensation and help. Therefore, the parts which are at a distance on the side of the obtuse angle, where the weighing instrument is concerned, and in the terms of our mathematical illustration, the parts with advantage are progressively further away from the mean, which is justice, but the parts on the side of the acute angle will increasingly approach and come near, and as it were through a continually suffering wrong and being at a disadvantage, while the others will travel downwards and into corruption and immersion in evil. They will rise up and take refuge in God through their need for retribution and compensation. At any rate, if it is necessary, taking the beam as a whole, for equality to be in this mathematical illustration, then again such a thing will be contrived thanks to the Pentad's participation, as it were, in a kind of justice. For one possibility is that if all the parts which are arranged at a fifth removed from the excessive parts are subtracted from them and added to the disadvantaged parts, then what is being sought will be the result. Footnote: equality is what is being sought. All the parts which are at a fifth removed from the excessive parts are 1, 2, 3, 4, respectively at a fifth removed from 6, 7, 8, 9. So if the sum of 1, 2, 3, 4, i.e. 10, is subtracted from the sum of 6, 7, 8, 9, and added to the sum of 1, 2, 3, 4, the result is equality. 20 equals 20. End of footnote. Alternatively, thanks to the Pentad's being a point of distinction and reciprocal separation, if the disadvantaged one which is closest to the balance on that side is subtracted from the one which is furthest from the balance on the excessive side and added to the one which is furthest from the balance on the other side, i.e. 1, if to effect equalization, 4 is subtracted from 9 and added to 1, and from 8, 3 is subtracted, which will be the addition to 2, and from 7, 2 is subtracted, which is added to 3, and from 6, 1 is subtracted, which is the addition to 4, to effect equalization. Then all of them equally, both the ones which have been punished as excessive and the ones which have been set right as wronged, will be assimilated to the mean of justice. For all of them will be 5 each, and alone remains unsubtracted and unadded, so that it is neither more nor less, but it alone encompasses by nature what is fitting and appropriate. And those who first form the characters of the letters in terms of shape, since theta signifies 9, and the mean of it as a square is epsilon, and the mean in nearly every case is seen as half, considered that epsilon former half of the letter theta, as if it were cut in two. Footnote: here imagining theta cut in half down the vertical axis. End of footnote. Because in this way, justice is most justly seen in the number 5, and the arithmetical image of a row is not implausibly likened to a beam. Pythagoras produced in the form of a maxim for those who know the instruction, do not overstep a beam, i.e. justice. Since in the realm of embodiment there are, according to natural scientists, 3 life-engendered things, vegetative, animal, and rational. And since the rational is subsumed under the hebdomad and the animal under the hexad, then the vegetative necessarily falls under the pentad, with the result that the pentad is the minimal extreme of life. For the monad is the root of all generations, and the dyad is change in respect of a single dimension, the triad in respect of a second dimension, the tetrad in respect of a third and more complete dimension, and the pentad is change in respect of all addition and increase, which falls under the vegetative aspect of the soul, in which, it goes without saying, perception in general is also interspersed. They call the pentad nemesis. At any rate, it distributes the heavenly and divine and physical elements by means of 5. It distributes the 5 forms to the cyclical movements both of the moon and of the rest of the heavenly bodies. The movements being evening, setting, evening, rising, dawn, setting, dawn, rising, and simple revolution which involves no setting or rising, Moreover, it distributes those heavenly bodies which are on epicycles to 2 stationary modes, or to progression or to retrogression, and those which are not to 1 natural regularity. Footnote: the theory of epicycles was a way of explaining the 4 apparently irregular motions of the planets, the sun and moon, however much regular motion. End of footnote. The general structure of plants is 5-fold: root, stem, bark, leaf, and fruit. And there are 5 precipitations of rain, snow, dew, hail, and frost, and 5 exhalations: steam, smoke, fog, mist, and the so-called whirlwind, which some call cyclone. This is why another word for pentad is pempad, because these movements are sent upwards and are subsumed under the pentad. Footnote: the root of the word translated sent is pemp. End of footnote. Because it levels out inequality, they call it providence and justice, division as it were, and Bobastion because of being honored at Bobastos in Egypt, and Aphrodite because it binds to each other a male and female number. Likewise, it is called nuptial and androgyny and demigod. The latter not only because it is half of 10, which is divine, but also because in its special diagram it is assigned the central place, and it is called twin because it divides into the decad, which is otherwise indivisible, and immortal and palace because it reveals the 5th essence, and heart-like because of the analogy of the heart being assigned the center in living creatures. From the second discourse on the Pentad of the Arithmetic of Nicomachus of Gerasa. When men are wronged, they want the gods to exist, but when they commit wrong, they do not want the gods to exist. Hence, they are wronged so that they may want the gods to exist. For if they do not want the gods to exist, they do not persevere. Therefore, if the cause of man's perseverance is their wanting the gods to exist, and if they want gods to exist when they are wronged, and if wrong, though an evil, still looks to nature's advantage, and whatever looks to nature's advantage is good, and nature is good, and providence is the same, then evil happens to men by providence. It is likely that the origins of this too were given by Homer, when he says, quote, "And then the Father stretched out golden scales, and put in 2 portions of death, which causes long grief, one for the horse-naming Trojans, one for the bronze-armored Greeks. And he pulled the scales up by the middle, and the death day of the Greeks was heavier. The portions of the Greeks settled on the fertile earth, while those of the Trojans rose up towards the broad sky." Footnote: from the Iliad, chapter 8, lines 69 through 74. End of footnote. End of section. Meet me at the next video as we continue with the Theology of Arithmetic on the mystical, mathematical, and cosmological symbolism of the first 10 numbers.